This is an arcade game. This is the new Atari Super System. Arcade, Atari Super System. You may like the Super System better. It has some of the best arcade and sports games. It even does something no arcade game can.
Telephone! It's Judy!
It lets you freeze the action.
Hello, Judy.
The new 5200 Super System.
Hello everyone, it's Kevin, and today we are looking at another console that I've never played before. A little while ago, I tried out the Atari 2600 for the first time. Going into that video, I wasn't really expecting much. I grew up with the NES, so I figured most of these games would feel way too old for me. Turns out, I was wrong. Sure, there were definitely some games that haven't aged very well, but there was also quite a few that I genuinely had a good time with, and some of them honestly surprised me. So after finishing that video, I instantly wondered, what about the Atari 5200? This is a console that I've heard about for years, but almost never because of the games. Whenever people bring up the Atari 5200, it's usually because of one thing: the controller. One of the biggest debacles in gaming history. I mean, the angry video game nerd made a video on the console, and that was the main topic, not the games. That's pretty much all I knew coming into this. I'd never played one, and I never knew anyone who owned one. So today, I wanted to change that. I picked 10 games that people seem to recommend. And by the end of this video, I'll let you know what I think about the console and its games, disregarding the controller. But first, let's quickly talk about where the Atari 5200 came from. By the early 1980s, Atari was still on top. The Atari 2600 had been around for a few years. It was selling incredibly well. And if you wanted to play video games at home, chances are you had an Atari sitting under your TV. The problem was, everyone else was starting to catch up. Consoles like the ColecoVision and Intellivision were starting to put out games that looked a lot closer to the arcade, especially compared to what the Atari 2600 could do. This doesn't surprise me. The 2600 came out back in 1977, and as we know it, technology always moves on. So Atari needed something more powerful. Instead of building an entirely new system from the ground up, they took a lot of the technology from their Atari 800 computer and built a console around it. That became the Atari 5200. The goal was pretty simple: give people better graphics, better sound, and games that looked a lot closer to the arcades, on a lower budget than it would take to make a brand new console. Looking at it today, I think they definitely achieved that. But Atari also made a couple of decisions that would end up hurting it, and the 5200 would end up neglected and forgotten through time. However, one thing that I've learned from these first time videos is not to judge a console before I actually play it. I mean, the Atari 2600 surprised me, maybe the 5200 will as well. Let's power on and find out. Man, I love Berserk. This is a game I already played on the Atari 2600, and I remember really enjoying it back then. So the question for me wasn't really, is Berserk good? It became, how much better is it on the Atari 5200? And honestly, quite a bit. You're still running through maze after maze blasting robots while trying to avoid evil auto, so that gameplay still hasn't really changed. But everything looks and feels better. The graphics are cleaner, the sound is better, and the movement feels a lot smoother. It just feels more complete, you know? I already like Berserk, as I mentioned before, but if I had a choice between the two, I'd probably play this version every time. It's the same game, just better. And yeah, Evil Auto is even more scarier now. Dig Dug is just an all-time classic. I've played this on the 2600 and the NES, and I like both versions, with the NES coming out on top. The idea behind this one is pretty straightforward. You're digging through tunnels underground, pumping enemies up until they explode, which is still messed up by the way, or trying to crush them with falling rocks. Simple enough. Now that I've played this game so much, I realize that sometimes it's worth taking the easy fight, Other times it makes more sense to lure a couple of enemies underneath a rock and take them both out at once. Those little decisions kept me coming back. It's also another game that really shows off what the 5200 was trying to do. Everything looks colorful, the animation is smooth, and it feels much closer to the arcade machine than I was expecting. I honestly wasn't expecting Dig Dug to be one of the games that surprised me the most, but it definitely did. It almost matches the NES version for me. Now we have Super Breakout. This one also isn't completely new to me because I played Breakout on the 2600. The gameplay is exactly what you'd expect. You've got a paddle at the bottom of the screen, you're bouncing a ball into rows of bricks, and you're trying to clear the screen without letting that ball get past you. Again, pretty simple, right? There's really not much else to it. We've all played this before, either through Breakout clones or on different consoles. It's one of those games that you could pick up in about 10 seconds, and before you know it, you've been playing for 15 minutes. There is one problem though, and something I need to mention. If you're playing this through emulation like I am, you will have a terrible time. This game runs way too fast. At first I thought maybe I was just terrible at it, but after looking into it, it's actually a known issue with emulation. You need to change a lot of settings, and even if you're using a joystick controller, you still need to make adjustments to the dead zones and other things like that. So if you have the option, I'd actually recommend playing this on some real hardware. Maybe not on the 5200 because of the controller situation, but something else, because that's how it was meant to be experienced. But besides all that, I could see why Atari packed this in with the system. It's easy to learn, anyone can play it, and it's still fun over 40 years later. I'll be honest, before making this video, I'd never even heard of Space Dungeon. After spending some time with it though, I'm kinda surprised that more people don't talk about it. It took me a couple minutes to get used to. Once it clicked though, everything started making sense. The game gets pretty hectic, especially when more enemies start to show up. I also enjoy the map system. This probably isn't the first game that people think of when they think of the 5200, but honestly, maybe it should be. It's one of the biggest surprises I had while making this video. No matter what console you're playing on, Joust is just thrilling. Now this is another game I've played on the 2600, and it ended up being one of my favorites in that video. So I came into this one hoping it would be even better. And thankfully, it is. If you've never played Joust before, you're flying around on what I could only describe as an ostrich with wings, and you're trying to knock enemy riders off before they knock you off. Yeah, it's a weird idea, but it somehow works. The first thing I noticed was just how smoother everything feels compared to the 2600 version. The controls felt great, the animation is a lot closer to the arcade, and the whole game is just more polished. One thing I like in this version is that there's different round types to keep things fresh. I already thought that Joust held up really well on the 2600. This version just takes everything that made that game fun and improves it. Honestly, if I wanted to sit down and play Joust today, this might be the version I choose. Out of the ones that I've played so far, of course. Maybe even over Balloon Fight. Kicks is pretty neat. It is also very satisfying to play. This is actually one of the games that I was most curious about because a lot of people recommended it in the comments. But it's one that I've never really heard of or played. The goal is basically to claim a certain percentage of the screen by drawing lines around an empty space while avoiding enemies. It sounds easy. That is, until you're halfway through drawing a huge section and something heads straight through your line. There were quite a few times where I got a little greedy, and this is one of those games where it's pretty easy to do that. But obviously that doesn't usually end well. I really like games that are easy to understand but still make you think, and I think Kicks does that really well. It's a nice change of pace from all the shooters and arcade action games we looked at so far, and I could definitely see myself coming back to this one day. This game Centipede is just always good, no matter what version you play. Review over. Nah, I'm kidding. Honestly though, I thought that this version held up pretty well. I wasn't expecting such a noticeable jump, but after playing this, is definitely an upgrade. It's slightly faster, but not as bad as Super Breakout. Everything just feels smoother again. The Centipede moves more naturally, there's a lot more going on, and it feels much closer to the arcade machine than what I played on the 2600. And of course this makes the gameplay itself even more addictive. If you haven't played this, you're shooting mushrooms, trying to stop the Centipede before it reaches the bottom of the screen, all while dealing with spiders, fleas, and everything else that's trying to ruin your life. It doesn't sound like much, but once things start speeding up, it gets pretty intense. I already liked Centipede before making this video, and the Atari 5200 version gave me another reason to appreciate it. Yet another beast of a classic, Galaxian. Now this is yet another one that I played on the 2600. Maybe you guys are starting to see a pattern here, and it's probably one of the reasons this console didn't do that great. But anyways, I found that the 2600 version was a perfectly fine game. After playing the 5200 version though, I realized how good it could be. It's pretty much the same game at its core. You're shooting waves of alien ships before they can take you out. The big difference is that everything just feels a lot more alive in this version. The enemies dive towards you more smoothly, the graphics are cleaner, and the colors really stand out. And it just feels a lot closer to the arcade machine. Again, if you've watched my 2600 videos, you'll know I enjoyed Galaxian, but after playing this version, I'd probably come back to this one instead. Pole position is interesting, but I think that my issue with it is just a me problem. No fault to the game itself. This is one of those games I'd always heard about, but I never actually sat down and played it until now. And honestly, it's okay. The goal is pretty simple. First you qualify for a race, and if you make it, you move on to the main event where you're weaving through traffic and trying to beat the clock. The problem is, I can't get past the qualifier. I think I'm doing something wrong because I can't get the car to go straight. Looking at it today, it's obviously not going to compete with modern racing games, but that's really not the point. I kept reminding myself that this came out in 1982. For the time, seeing a road stretch off into the distance and cars scaling towards you would have really been impressive. Would I still play this over something like Rad Racer? No, probably not. But I could absolutely appreciate what Atari was able to do here. What kind of speed measurement is LO though? You probably knew this was coming. Pac-Man is the quintessential game on the console. The Atari 2600 version had a reputation for a reason. When I finally played it, I understand why people were disappointed. It just wasn't the Pac-Man people wanted. So coming into the 5200 version, I was hoping for a big improvement. And thankfully, that's exactly what I got. This actually feels like Pac-Man. The maze looks right, the movement feels a lot smoother, the ghosts behave more like what you'd expect, and overall, it finally captures the feeling of the arcade game. There are even cutscenes in this one. Is it the perfect game? No, but it's great compared to the Atari 2600 version. It's not even a fair fight. It's honestly kind of amazing to see how much Atari improved in such a short amount of time. If someone asked me which version I'd recommend playing today, disregarding modern remakes or releases, it's likely this one thus far without a second thought. So, after spending some time with the Atari 5200, what do I actually think? Honestly, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. Coming into this video, I expected to spend most of my time talking about the controller, and that the games were pretty much the same as their Atari 2600 counterparts. But after playing these 10 games, what I'm gonna remember are the games. A lot of them were genuine upgrades over the 2600 versions that I've already played, and a couple of them actually surprised me because I'd never even heard of them before. By the end of this video, I found myself thinking something I really wasn't expecting. The Atari 5200 isn't remembered for its games, it's remembered for everything around it. So, in my opinion, why did it fail? I think there's a few reasons. The first one is obvious, and it's a sticking point. The controller. Instead of a regular joystick, Atari went with an analog stick, a number pad, and a separate start, pause, and reset button. It probably sounded like a great idea at the time, but even if you like the games, it's hard to ignore how awkward this thing feels compared to regular joysticks. I'm not sure why they chose to model it after the Intellivision and ColecoVision style of controllers either. On top of that, the controls are also developed with a reputation for not being very reliable. They were made in such a shoddy manner that most of them didn't really survive too long. That's not exactly the kind of reputation you want for your brand new console. The second problem was compatibility. If you've already owned an Atari 2600 and had a collection of games, none of them worked on the 5200. That meant people had to start their collections all over again. Yeah, sure, Atari eventually released an adapter for some versions of the system, but by then a lot of people have already made up their minds. The third issue was the library. I was alluding to this earlier. Now don't get me wrong, I think there are some really good games here, but a lot of the system's biggest titles were arcade ports. They were good arcade ports, or games that were already on the 2600. There just wasn't enough exclusive experiences to convince everyone that they needed a 5200. And then there was the biggest problem of all. The timing. The Atari 5200 launched right before the North American video game crash. The market became flooded with consoles and games, consumer confidence disappeared, and Atari found itself trying to sell a new console at one of the worst possible times. Even a better launch probably would have had a hard time surviving all of this, but it is what it is. History has been written. So, did this experience with the Atari 5200 library change my opinion? Yeah. Obviously, I don't love the controller design. I don't think that's ever gonna happen. But after finally spending some time with the games, I completely understand why people still defend this console. The hardware itself was capable, the games were fun, but unfortunately, the Atari 5200 ended up being remembered more for its mistakes than what it actually did well. And that's a bit of a shame. If you've played the Atari 5200, let me know down in the comments what your favorite game is. I'm always looking for more recommendations, especially now that I've finally spent some time with the system. And if you enjoyed the video, stick around because there are plenty of retro consoles and games that I've never played before. And that's a wrap. It is time to reboot. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the other side.